The dancing plague of 1518, when 400 people couldn't stop dancing. In the summer of 1518, a woman stepped into the streets of Strasbourg and began dancing uncontrollably for 6 days straight. And within weeks, 400 people joined her in what became the deadliest dance epidemic in human history. This is the true story of the dancing plague and what it reveals about the terrifying fragility of the human mind. July 14th, 1518, Strasbourg, a prosperous city along the Rhine River in the Holy Roman Empire. The morning started like any other. Merchants opened their stalls, farmers brought produce to market, children played in the narrow alleys. Then Frau Troffea walked out of her home, and everything changed. Without warning, without music, without any apparent reason, she began to dance. But this wasn't joyful dancing. Her movements were frantic, violent, convulsive. Her arms flailed wildly, her legs kicked, her body twisted in patterns that seemed completely beyond her control. Her husband rushed to her side, begging her to stop. She couldn't. Something had seized her body and refused to let go. Frau Troffea danced through the morning. She danced through the afternoon. She danced as the sun set and darkness fell. She danced through the entire night, her feet swelling, her body drenched in sweat, her face twisted in an expression witnesses described as somewhere between ecstasy and pure agony. When exhaustion finally overwhelmed her, she collapsed into a brief sleep. But when she woke, she immediately rose and began dancing again. This continued for 6 straight days. By the end of that first week, something absolutely horrifying happened. 34 other people had joined her. They were all dancing in the streets, their movements matching Frau Troffea's frantic, uncontrollable gyrations. They danced in public squares, in narrow alleyways, until blood seeped from their swollen feet into their leather boots. And none of them could stop. The city council faced a crisis unlike anything in their experience. They called in local physicians for answers. The doctors examined the dancers and reached a diagnosis based on medieval medical theory. They believed the afflicted were suffering from hot blood, an overheating of the body that could only be cured by dancing until the fever burned itself out. So the city council made a decision that would prove catastrophically wrong. They constructed a wooden stage in the horse market. They hired musicians to provide accompaniment. They brought in professional dancers to keep the afflicted moving. They opened guild halls and a grain market to provide additional dancing space. Their logic was simple. If hot blood caused the dancing, then more dancing would release the heat and cure the disease. It was like trying to cure a fire by adding fuel. The dancing didn't stop. It spread. By August, approximately 400 people were dancing through the streets of Strasbourg. The city became a scene of absolute chaos. Men, women, and children danced without rest, without food, without water, their bodies pushed far beyond the limits of human endurance. Contemporary accounts describe their eyes as glassy and vacant, their arms thrashing violently, their clothes soaked with sweat and hanging from their emaciated frames. They screamed for help, even as their legs continued to move. The dancers were not enjoying themselves. This was not a festival. Multiple historical accounts make it crystal clear that the afflicted were terrified, exhausted, and desperate to stop. They pleaded with onlookers to help them. They cried out in pain as their bloody, swollen feet continued to pound against the cobblestones. Some collapsed and had to be carried away. Others continued dancing while unconscious, their bodies moving even as their minds shut down from exhaustion. The death toll remains disputed. Some sources claim as many as 15 people died each day at the epidemic's peak, from heart attacks, strokes, and complete physical exhaustion. What is certain is that many dancers collapsed, and the physical toll on their bodies was severe and lasting. By early September, the city council finally abandoned their failed approach. They banned public music and dancing, they closed the stages, and they took the remaining dancers on a pilgrimage to a mountaintop shrine dedicated to Saint Vitus, a Christian martyr believed to have the power to both curse and cure dancing afflictions. The dancers prayed at the shrine, and within days, the epidemic began to subside. By mid-September, it was over. So what actually caused this? The question has puzzled historians and scientists for 5 centuries. The first theory points to ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that grows on damp rye and produces chemicals related to LSD that can cause convulsions and hallucinations. But this theory has major problems. Ergot poisoning reduces blood flow to the extremities, making sustained dancing physically impossible. And the symptoms don't fully match what witnesses described. The second and most widely accepted theory comes from medical historian John Waller, the leading expert on the dancing plague. Waller argues it was a case of mass psychogenic illness, also known as mass hysteria. This is a real medical phenomenon where groups of people develop physical symptoms without any organic cause, triggered by extreme psychological stress and shaped by cultural beliefs. To understand this, you need to understand what life was like in Strasbourg in 1518. The years leading up to the epidemic had been catastrophic. Harsh winters and failed harvests brought widespread famine. People were literally starving to death in the streets. Smallpox and syphilis were spreading. Floods had devastated crops and homes. The population was experiencing extreme chronic stress, the kind of prolonged suffering that pushes the human mind to its breaking point. But stress alone doesn't explain why the suffering took the form of dancing. Here's where cultural belief becomes crucial. The people of early 16th century Europe believed deeply in the supernatural. They specifically believed in Saint Vitus, who was said to have the power to inflict uncontrollable dancing on those who angered him. This belief was so widespread that the term Saint Vitus dance entered the medical vocabulary. In Waller's analysis, the dancing plague was a perfect storm. The people were under unbearable stress. They believed supernatural forces could seize their bodies. When Frau Troffea began dancing, others saw in her movements the curse of Saint Vitus made manifest. Fear is contagious. Belief is contagious. And in a population primed by starvation, disease, and terror, the dancing spread like wildfire through mass suggestion. This phenomenon isn't confined to the distant past. In 1962, an epidemic of uncontrollable laughter broke out in a girls' school in Tanzania, eventually affecting over 1,000 people and forcing 14 schools to close. In 2011, students at a high school in upstate New York developed mysterious tics and verbal outbursts that spread through the student body. In each case, extreme stress combined with social contagion to produce physical symptoms that were entirely real, even though they had no organic cause. The dancing plague of 1518 wasn't even the only such outbreak in European history. Similar dancing manias had occurred along the Rhine River since 1374. The 1518 epidemic was simply the largest, the deadliest, and the best documented. Today, the dancing plague serves as a powerful reminder of the complex relationship between mind and body. It demonstrates that psychological suffering can manifest in physical symptoms that are entirely real and entirely beyond conscious control. It shows how cultural beliefs shape the expression of distress, and it reveals the dangers of well-intentioned interventions based on flawed understanding. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect is what it reveals about the hidden fragility of the human mind. We like to believe we're in control of our bodies, that our movements are our own. But under the right circumstances, under sufficient stress, with the right cultural framework, that control can slip away. The dancers of Strasbourg weren't weak or foolish. They were ordinary people pushed to extraordinary breaking points by famine, disease, and fear. On the streets of Strasbourg in the summer of 1518, 400 people discovered a terrifying truth. Sometimes the body has a mind of its own. They danced not because they wanted to, but because something inside them, some combination of stress and belief and contagious fear, compelled them to move. And the forces that drove those dancers are still with us today, waiting for the right combination of stress and belief to set them loose again.
A vault of secrets most will never find.
Unlock the hidden treasures. Vex Vault. Subscribe and hit the bell.